It's just like a haunting refrain, it's the same kind of middle passage again.
Burning rubble, a new day has risen. Samuel Jackson. spiritless, hey spiritless, bassa, bassa, bassa spiritless, bassa spiritless.
So that is why we didn't see there was never a plan for true liberation. But we just can't see ourselves. And when the years of slavery walking for fear, be free. While not still kneeling at the old wooden cross, looking up, waiting in the glorified laws. While the trump the family, the slave ship hold, waiting to be healed in the living souls. Now across the world, we march for change, cause it's time to walk and embed the change.
Merchant ships, minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit, but my hand was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation, triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever have, redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. We've got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever had.
That drum call by the Hayesville Youth Group gets this morning's ceremony started. And now I invite you to stand for the national anthems of Cuba and Barbados. Thank you very much. You may be seated. I now invite Baba John Tefase Howell to give the invocation and libation.
Lake Baco, Lake Bacona, Lake Baco, Lake Bacona, Lake Baco, Lake Baco, Lake Baco, Lake Baco, Lake Baco, Lake Baco, Lake Baco. Today we are gathered here to commemorate the atrocity that took place right over here in our waters. This tragedy should never go unrecognized in Barbados. And I would like to call some of the names of those that perish in these waters. But before I do, this is the family gathering. And I want for you to call some of your ancestors' names so that we could invoke their spirits into this space. I say Iba She. Iba means I pay homage, I pay respect to, and then you call the names. You can call the names simultaneously. It's okay. Ibashe, 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 Sylvester Howell, Ibashe, Aline Howell, Ibashe. I just want you to call your ancestors' names, the ones in your family lineage that have gone on to the ancestral realm, to invite the spirit into this space this morning. Ibashe, 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 oh, Ashe. If we want to call some of the names, you know, there were 73 of them, I believe, that perished in these waters, but we're going to just call a few because it would take very long. Ibashe,
Wilfredo Perez Perez,
Ibashe,
Angel Tomas Rodriguez,
Ibashe,
and Nelson,
Ibashe,
Miguel Espinoza Cabrera,
Ibashe,
Jose Ramon Ferrandez Lefebvre,
Ibashe,
Juan Min Ik,
Ibashe,
Rita Thomas,
Ibashe,
Violet Thomas,
Ibashe,
Key Bone,
Ibashe,
Margaret Bradshaw,
Ibashe.
Raymond Prasad,
And as we gathered here, those of us who are in the vanguard of this struggle, we want to call some of the names of those who fought for liberation and who would have gone on to the ancestral realm. I want you to join me. This is the family gathering. And so you can call the names, call out loud so we can hear the names of their ancestors. Ibashe, Ibashe, Fidel Castro, Ibashe, 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 Ibashe. And I always remember those from Haiti. We could never forget our brothers and sisters in Haiti who gave their lives to sound overture. Ibashe. And as we gather here this morning, we ask that a favorable solution could be found for the problems that Haiti is confronting today. Ibashe, 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 oh. Give thanks, Ibashe.
Thank you, Baptiste Fasse Howell. Dr. Chantal Monroe-Knight, Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister. Your Excellency David Comijong, Ambassador of Barbados to Caricom. Your Excellency Yanet Stable Cardenas, Embassy of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Your Excellency Geneva Ross Tyndall, Consul General of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. And Dr. Chantal Onoayu, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Sharon Marshall. We meet this morning in this solemn act of commemoration to honor the memory of the 73 souls lost on this date in 1976, when Cubana de Aviación Flight 455 was brought down by a terrorist bomb attack just off these shores. We also recognize the first observance of the Caricom Cuba Day against terrorism. I understand that a number of members of the Eagle Clan, Lokono Arawak indigenous community of Barbados are here with us today in solidarity and reverence. I've been informed that several members of the indigenous community have a deep connection to the Cubana terrorist tragedy, for it was one of their own clan members, Elder Murray Chandler, who heeded the emergency call for assistance by the then government of Barbados to private citizens and sailed out into these West Coast waters to help retrieve bodies of the victims. We welcome you. And we now invite our representative from the Caricom Secretariat, Dr. Chantal Onolaiwu, Director of External Trade, to address you.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. All protocols having been observed, it is my pleasure to extend greetings on behalf of Dr. Carla Barnett, Secretary General of the Caribbean Community. Today, we are gathered to mark an important initiative which is being undertaken by Barbados in observance of October 6 as Caricom Cuba Day against terrorism. At the 8th Caricom Cuba Summit in December 2022, heads of government collectively took the meaningful and significant step of designating October 6th as Caricom Cuba Day against terrorism. This was in acknowledgement of the dark and tragic events on that day in 1976, when 73 innocent lives of Cuban and Caricom nationals were lost to an act of terror that befell Cubana de Aviación Flight 455. The events of that day still resonate with us and serve as a stark reminder of the ever-present threats that seek to undermine the peace and security that we hold dear. By observing this day, we not only pay tribute to the victims, but also declare with unwavering unity our commitment to eradicating the scourge of terrorism from our region and building a future wherein the Caribbean remains a beacon of peace and cooperation. The bombing of Flight 455 was not only a tragedy, but also a pivotal moment in the history of diplomatic relations between Caricom and Cuba. It was a test of resilience for our shared values and the strength of our bonds. Rather than succumbing to fear, the Caribbean region emerged from the darkness of that day with a resolve and collective determination to stand together, grow stronger, and build relationships founded on peace, mutual respect, and understanding. Since then, the ties between Caricom and Cuba have not just endured, they have flourished over the years. Some 50 years ago, Caricom and Cuba laid the foundation to establish a strong and mutually beneficial relationship. This exemplary model of South-South cooperation stemmed from the historic and courageous act of 4 newly independent Caribbean states which established diplomatic relations with their sister nation amid immense political tensions at the international level. This deep-seated courage that has always underscored our intra-regional ties must continue to propel our actions in the face of adversity. The Caribbean has consistently taken the chance to build stronger diplomatic relationships despite external pressures, creating a conducive atmosphere for genuine trust to flourish. The Caribbean remains a region of vibrant cultures and resilient communities. However, we continue to witness the shadow of terrorism and transnational crime. In the face of such challenges, it is paramount that we stand united. The bonds that connect us must remain a commitment etched in our collective consciousness. Intra-regional collaboration is not just a necessity. It is our duty to forge a shield against forces that threaten our safety and security. Let us therefore regard today as a call to action as we aspire to preserve the Caribbean as a zone of peace. a sanctuary where the warmth of our people is not overshadowed by the dark clouds of violence. We're cognizant of the fact that the work of building a secure and harmonious region extends beyond our shores. We must collaborate on a broader scale, engaging in hemispheric efforts to combat terrorism and transnational crime, to advance human dignity and preserve the sanctity of life. Together, we are stronger. We must therefore continue to strengthen the ties that bind us, sharing intelligence, resources, and expertise to build a formidable defense against the scourge of terrorism. By learning from each other, sharing best practices, and collectively confronting this menace, we can fortify the Caribbean as a bastion of peace and stability and build a more prosperous and secure region for us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ononaiwu, for your remarks and the call to strengthen cooperation and collaboration within the region. Cuba was the target of the dastardly act which we recall today. It claimed the lives of 57 Cuban citizens, passengers, and crew aboard the aircraft. Please welcome Her Excellency Janet Stable Cardenas, Ambassador of Cuba to Barbados, to make her remarks.
Good morning. Senator Dr. Honorable Chantal Monroe Knight, Minister of the Prime Minister's Office for Cultural Affairs, Senator Trevor Prescott, Ms. Shanta Ononawi, Director of External Trade of Caricom, Ambassador David Commission, Ambassador of Barbados to Caricom, Her Excellency Geneva Rose Tyndall, Consul General of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana to Barbados, Her Excellency Marta Ortega, Chargé d'Affaires of the Embassy of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to Barbados, other distinguished colleagues of the Diplomatic Corps, Mr. Ruperto Herrera Tabillo, Secretary General of the National Olympic Committee of Cuba, esteemed officials of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, dear friends of the Barbados-Cuba Friendship Association, dear compatriots of our loved Cuba, ladies and gentlemen. In an emotional speech of October 15 of 1976 at the memorial service of the victims of the Cubana Airlines Flight Terrorist Act, Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro Ruz expressed, unquote, "Our athletes' sacrifice in the flower of their life and intelligence will be eternal champions of our hearts. Their gold medals will not lie on the ocean floor, but will rise like overflowing suns and symbols of the Cuban firmament. Our crew members, our heroic aviation workers, and all our selfless compatriots sacrificed under cowardly circumstances that day will live eternally in the memory, the affection, and the admiration of the people. To our Guyanese and Korean brothers, immolated that day goes our most fervent memory at this time also. They remind us that imperialism's crimes have no borders, that we all belong to the same human family, and that our struggle is universal. On October 6 of 1976, Cubana regular flight 5455 had started in Guyana. After a stopover in Trinidad and Tobago, the DC-8 plane arrived in Barbados with the aim of continuing towards Jamaica and finally to Havana. That day, the flight was interrupted. 9 minutes after takeoff from Barbados International Airport, the plane would drop into the sea, victim of the explosion on tendon of 2 terrorist bombs. The life of all 73 passengers and crew on board, nationals of Cuba, Guyana, and Korea, were lost. That same day, policemen in Trinidad and Tobago detained 2 mercenaries from Venezuela who had committed the crime on destruction of, and by proxy for the 2 Cuban origin intellectual authors, Luis Posada Carriles and Orlando Bosch, trained and run by the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States of America. Unsplained acquittals and unfulfilled sentences left the perpetrators of this abominable act of terrorism unpunished. Unfortunately, the hate, bigotry, and zealotry that fueled that act is still rampant within the same aggressors, and only some of the names and locations have changed, while the essence has not. In the last 3 years, the Cuban embassies in Washington, D.C. and France has been victim of 2 terrorist attacks for which justice has not yet been done. The threats to the Cuban Revolution and the acts of the aggression under the blockade and the inclusion of Cuba in the list of alleged country sponsors of terrorism are still in place without valid arguments and without reason that support such genocidal acts against a people that defends its unity, independence, fight for their dreams of justice for Cuba and for the world. Today, we also commemorate the first anniversary of the Caricom Cuba Day Against Terrorism, declared during the 8th Caricom Cuba Summit held in Barbados in December of 2022. This represents the reason and the voice of condemnation of terrorism in any of its manifestations, to never forget the victims of these acts and to maintain the commitment of Caribbean people to peace. At the inauguration of this monument, this same day, but in 1998, Fidel declared Cuban gratitude to Barbados with the following words, and I quote, "Many monuments have been erected in memory of martyrs of noble causes. This one that we see here today is one more, but Cuba will never forget it. Today, close to you and close to the memory of those who were so cruelly killed that day, our hearts will remain forever in perennial homage and with the gratitude of a courageous people that dare for a way in my noble motherland will not stop its struggles and will never surrender. Eternal glory for them." Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador. At this point in the program, we'll pause from the official remarks and listen to the children. Students of the Ellerslie School will recite a poem. Please welcome them.
Good morning. Fiesta de la muerte. Un gran dolor desgarra el corazón del pueblo. Mi corazón, que es suyo, también está de duelo. Solo la muerte está de fiesta. Solo ella. En la cementerio de espanto, aire se estremecen. Sin excepción, todos los muertos, disfrazados de cóndores, suizos, buitres y cuervos clavan. Huenden sus picos en seres indefensos. Con graznidos atroces celebran el festejo. La indignación subleve el corazón del pueblo. No llora, grita, patria, no muerte, venceremos.
Good morning, everyone. Festival of Death, the heart of the people is torn with great pain. My heart, which is yours, is also grieving. Only death celebrates, only her in the cemetery. They tremble with fear and anger, without exception, all the dead, disguised as condors, dirty vultures and crows. They rail, they sink their beaks into defenseless beings. With atrocious squawks, they celebrate. With indignation, the people revolt in their hearts. Don't cry, shout, motherland, no death, we shall be victorious.
Muy bien hecho, chicos. As we resume the official remarks, we invite Her Excellency Geneva Ross Tyndall, Consul General of Guyana, to the lectern.
Honorable Minister Chantal Monroe Knight, and other esteemed officials of the government of Barbados, Her Excellency Janet Stabile Cardenas, Ambassador of Cuba, His Excellency Ambassador David Commission, Ambassador of Caricom, distinguished ambassadors and representatives of other nations, esteemed representatives of regional and international organizations, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, a warm and gracious good morning to you all. Today, the Cooperative Republic of Guyana reaffirms its solidarity with the government and people of Cuba, with whom we share close and cordial ties. On this solemn occasion, we remember October 6, 1976, as a dark chapter in the history of international aviation and the history of this hemisphere. Today is always an emotional day for me, even though this event would have taken place some years before I was born. But it's always saddening to know the tragedy, the lives lost. On October 6, 1976, 73 lives were lost. 57 Cubans, 11 Guyanese, and 5 North Koreans. This tragic event serves as a stark reminder that terrorism knows no boundaries. It transcends borders, and it strikes at the very heart of our shared humanity. The pain and suffering endured by families who lost their loved ones remain indelible in our collective memory. Excellencies, today also marks the first anniversary of Caricom, Cuba Day Against Terrorism. This day was declared by the heads of government of Caricom in the Bridgetown Declaration, held last December 6, 2022, here in Barbados. On this day, we pay tribute to the 73 victims, and we reaffirm our collective commitment as a region to combat the scourge of terrorism in all its forms. The government and people of Guyana stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Cuba, the Caribbean region, and all nations affected by acts of terrorism. We join our voice with the global community unequivocally, condemning terrorism, a menace that threatens the principles of peace, justice, and the sanctity of human life. Our thoughts and prayers continue to be with the families and loved ones who bear this burden. The establishment of Caricom Cuba Day Against Terrorism underscores our region's commitment to international peace and security. It is a day for reflection, remembrance, and renewed commitment to prevent acts of terrorism. This day signifies our collective resolve as Caricom nations, Cuba, and the international community to work to prevent such acts. In our unwavering commitment to contribute to global security, Guyana continues to strengthen its national strategy, we continue to strengthen our national strategy against terrorism and to combat terrorist financing. I'm sorry. I'm having some technical difficulty with the laptop. Just 1 minute? No, the laptop. Yes. So in our unwavering commitment to contribute to global security, Guyana continues to strengthen its national strategy to combat terrorist financing. Additionally, as we prepare to assume a non-permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council for the period 2024-2025, Guyana, in collaboration with its fellow council members, is poised to take a proactive stance in addressing this intricate global challenge. Recognizing the pivotal role of domestic, regional, and international authorities and partners, Guyana is dedicated to fostering extensive cooperation and collaboration to counteract terrorism and terrorist financing. Our aspiration is for a world where nations respect the rule of law, coexist in peace and prosperity, free from the shadow of terrorism. Excellencies, in honoring the memory of those who perished in the Cuba air disaster, we also pay tribute to the enduring spirit of unity and cooperation that binds Caricom nations. Together, we pledge to promote dialogue, understanding, and mutual respect among nations, recognizing these as the cornerstone of lasting peace. As we commemorate this day, let us recommit ourselves to building a world where terrorism has no place, and where the ideals of justice, tolerance, and respect for human rights prevail. Let us remember the victims not only with the words, but with actions that promote peace and unity. In concluding, on this day, October 6th, designated Caricom Cuba Day Against Terrorism, we remember the lives lost. We honor the enduring bond between Caricom and Cuba, and we pledge to work tirelessly for a world free from the scourge of terrorism. May the souls of the departed rest in eternal peace, and may their memory inspire us to build a brighter and more peaceful future. Gone, but not forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, Consul General Ross Tyndall. You must have been a Girl Guide. Be prepared. When the technology fails, good old-fashioned paper still works. We heard from Ellerslie School a short while ago. It's now the turn of the renowned St. Leonard's Boys School Choir to perform for us under the direction of Mr. Andrew Loki. Please welcome them.
Muy buenos días a todos. Por desgracia, el odio existe. Pero ¿cómo vamos a responder? El amor. Esta mañana vamos a cantar una canción, Love Changes Everything. El amor cambia todo.
changes everything. Lands and faces, earth and sky. Love changes everything. How you live and how you die. Love can make a summer fly, or a night seem like a lifetime. Yes, love changes everything. Now you tremble at your name. Love will never be the same. Love changes everything. Days are longer, words mean more. Love changes everything. Pain is deeper than before. Love will turn your world around, and that world will last forever. Yes, love changes everything, brings you glory, brings you shame. Nothing in the world will ever be the same. Off into the world we go, planning futures, shaping years. Love bursting and suddenly all our wisdom disappears. Love makes fools of everyone. All the rules we make are broken. Yes, love changes everyone. Live or perish in His flame. Love will let you be the same. Love will never let you be the same.
What a beautiful and uplifting message from the golden voices of the St. Leonard's Boys' School Choir. Love changes everything. The final speaker on our program this morning is His Excellency David Commejon, Ambassador of Barbados to Caricom. Ambassador Commejon.
Protocol having been so well established, permit me simply to say, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, comrades, good morning. Every year, we gather at this monument in remembrance of the 73 passengers and crew who perished in that Cubana flight just off this west coast of Barbados back in 1976. And each year we come to this ceremony with feelings and emotions of sadness, solemnity, and anger. Anger at the tragic and senseless loss of life, but also anger at the fact that the two masterminds of the bombing of the Cubana aircraft, Luis Posada Corrales and Orlando Bosch, went to their graves without ever having been held accountable and punished for the horrendous and mind-numbing pain and injury that they inflicted on so many Cuban, Guyanese, and North Korean families, and on the nations and people of Cuba, Guyana, North Korea, and indeed Barbados. But this year we come with yet another emotion added into that complex of sadness, solemnity, and anger. We come with feelings of pride. Pride that on the 6th of December 2022, the heads of government of our Caribbean community and Cuba exhibited an exemplary sense of responsibility and further dignified the 6th of October by designating it Caricom Cuba Day Against Terrorism. When Barbados piloted the resolution at the 8th Caricom Cuba Summit in December of last year to designate Caricom Cuba Day Against Terrorism, we did so with the understanding that the Cubana terrorist tragedy of 1976 was the first act of terrorism of such a magnitude involving a civilian airliner, and that it took place a full 25 years before the infamous 9/11 event, and is, in a very real sense, the poster child event of international terrorism. A Caricom Cuba Day Against Terrorism is therefore a day on which the Republic of Cuba, all 15 full Caricom member states, and all 5 associate Caricom member states are expected to engage in activities to highlight the evils of terrorism, to evince our collective resolve to condemn and combat all forms of terrorism, and to demonstrate our determination to preserve our Caribbean as a zone of peace. Indeed, if there is one group of people on the face of this earth who should know something about terrorism and be qualified to speak to the world about terrorism, it is the Caribbean people. And I say so because virtually our entire history in the Caribbean has been all about having terrorism inflicted upon us by powerful, marauding European nations and entities, and having to resist and transcend such terrorism. Our Caribbean region was founded in the most extreme forms of violence, warfare, genocide, criminality, and terrorism. From Christopher Columbus in 1492 and the whole process of the extermination, the genocide of the indigenous people that he put in motion, to the centuries of enslavement of our African ancestors. It was terrorism. And I always remind people that the concept of the concentration camp wasn't born in 1930s Nazi Germany. In fact, if you want to find the very first concentration camps, you have to look to 17th and 18th century Barbados and Jamaica and Antigua, Guyana, Cuba, Haiti. Those were the first concentration camps. So let us be clear. This issue of terrorism is an issue that we Caribbean people know only too well. And if our history is properly interpreted, it is clear that it has been a history of resisting, overcoming, and transcending terrorism. But of course, if there is one Caribbean nation that has been the foremost target of terrorism, inclusive of state-sponsored terrorism, both in the distant past and in the here and now, it is the Republic of Cuba. Ever since the triumph of the Cuban Revolution on the 1st of January 1959, the nation and people of Cuba have been victims of the most horrendous acts of terrorism. A short list of some of the most notorious examples of terrorism inflicted on the Cuban people would be as follows, and I just give a few. The blowing up of the La Cubre boat in Havana Harbor in 1960, killing 70 people. The fomenting of internal subversion within Cuba. The organizing and training of mercenaries to attack Cuba, culminating in the Bay of Pigs invasion of 17th April 1961, causing the deaths of 157 Cubans and wounding hundreds. The deliberate introduction into Cuba in 1981 of an epidemic of hemorrhagic dengue fever. The arson at the Levantam Daycare Center in Havana in 1980 with 570 children inside. The blowing up of hotels in Cuba in 1998 in a campaign orchestrated by the said Luis Posada Corriles, who masterminded the bombing of the Cubana aircraft. And I can go on and on with examples of this continuous assault on the people and nation of Cuba. Now, the list of terrorist acts that I've just outlined is a list of acts of physical destruction, blowing up planes, blowing up hotels. But there's another type of imposition on the nation and people of Cuba that, in light of the tremendous damage and injury that it has done to Cuban lives, could be considered to be an act of terrorism. Of course, I refer to the imposition since 1962 by the government of the United States of America of a devastating economic, trade, and financial blockade on Cuba, an illegal blockade that has existed for some 63 years now. And to add insult to injury, on the 11th of January of 2021, in the last and dying days of the Trump presidency, Trump and his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, cynically, perversely, and vindictively placed Cuba on the U.S. State Department's unilateral list of countries that sponsor terrorism. Now, as we all know, far from being a perpetrator or sponsor of terrorism, Cuba has, in fact, been the victim of no less than 713 acts of terrorism, the vast majority of which have been organized, financed, and executed by persons or organizations based in the territory of the United States of America. The Cuban government has calculated that the acts of terrorism against Cuba have killed some 3,478 persons and have maimed 2,099 Cuban citizens. In addition, damages to life and property have been calculated to reach the total of 181 billion US dollars. That is the country that they put on a list of state sponsors of terrorism. As part of its constitution, Cuba has ratified its condemnation and rejection of terrorism in all its forms. And indeed, Cuba has maintained a manifestly clear and transparent position in the fight against terrorism. But as Mr. Trump and Mr. Pompeo were only too well aware, the negative consequences derived from inclusion in this State Department list are numerous, including restrictions to Cuba's exports, diminished commercial benefits, obstacles to obtaining credit from international financial institutions, and the list goes on and on. Furthermore, the placing of Cuba on that list reinforces the effects of the illegal US blockade by increasing difficulties for Cuba to engage in international trade, to carry out financial operations, and to acquire simple, basic staples for its people. This terrible and undeserved state of affairs prompted Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley to make the following statement about Cuba at the recently concluded United Nations General Assembly. And I'm going to quote the words of Prime Minister Motley. This is what she said: that Cuba can help so many in this world and yet be the continued victim of a blockade of over 60 years. But worse than that, a designation as a state sponsor of terrorism is wrong, wrong, wrong. And you know when a Bajan repeats a word 3 times, they really mean it. Wrong, wrong, wrong. We left Cuba last week, and what the people of Cuba are being asked to face on a daily basis because of a designation by a dying presidency is wrong. And the voices of the global community, many of whom have been beneficiaries of Cuban assistance, need to stand united. The artificial division of who is right and who is wrong, and who is good and who is bad in the eyes of those who are powerful cannot continue to be the way in which this world functions. End of quote. That's my Prime Minister. I therefore wish to conclude my address today by demanding, on behalf of the government and people of Barbados, and indeed on behalf of the entire Caribbean community, that the government of the United States of America terminate its illegal blockade of Cuba and remove Cuba from the U.S. State Department's list of state sponsors of terrorism. I want to remind the government of the USA that every single year for the last 31 years, the overwhelming majority of the nations of the world gather at the United Nations and pass a resolution that affirms that the U.S. blockade of Cuba is illegal and that it must be terminated. Indeed, on the last occasion that the resolution was voted on, some 183 nations voted in favor of the resolution, and only 2 nations, inclusive of the United States, voted against it. I also want to remind the United States of America of a very relevant episode in its recent history that it seems to have forgotten. On the 26th of July, 1964, almost exactly 2 years after the U.S. had imposed its blockade on Cuba, the U.S.-dominated Organization of American States, the OAS, followed the American lead and imposed a similar set of sanctions on Cuba. However, 11 years later, on the 29th of July, 1975, the nations of the OAS voted to terminate their sanctions against Cuba. This historic OAS meeting was reported on by the New York Times newspaper. And I just want to share quickly with you the New York Times report, the actual words of the report. And I quote, "The Organization of American States tonight ended political and economic sanctions against Cuba, effectively abolishing the embargo imposed 11 years ago. The decision was approved by 16 of the 21 voting OAS members, including the United States." Explaining the United States vote in favor of the resolution, William S. Millard, the American delegate, said it represented, quote, "a generally acceptable solution since it was the will of a large majority. The vote," he said, quote, "places the issue in its proper perspective and permits us to concentrate our multilateral energies on the more fundamental problems of this hemisphere." End of quote. Secretary of State Kissinger had said that the United States would not make a move to improve relations with Cuba until the OAS embargo was ended. Mr. Millard said today that there may be, quote, "conversations that might lead to some kind of normalization between Washington and Havana." That's end of quote. That's the end of the New York Times article. Well, that was 48 years ago. 48 years ago, the government of the United States of America voted to terminate the OAS's blockade of Cuba because, in the words of the US's permanent representative to the OAS, and I quote again, "it was the will of a large majority," end of quote. And also because the removal of the OAS blockade, in his words, permits us to concentrate our multilateral energies on the more fundamental problems of this hemisphere. End of quote. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the height of hypocrisy for the government of the United States to be able to understand so clearly why they should respect the will of the majority and act constructively in the interests of our hemisphere by voting to terminate the OAS's illegal blockade against Cuba, but pretend that they can't see that a similar logic applies to their own illegal blockade of Cuba. Brothers and sisters, we must never stop from calling out this hypocrisy. We must never resile from calling out this hypocrisy until it ends. On this first Caricom Cuba Day Against Terrorism, I say, President Biden, do the right thing. End the blockade against Cuba. Help us to solidify our Caribbean as a zone of peace, free from all forms of terrorism. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Ambassador Commejon, I thank you for your impassioned and well-researched discourse on the situation of the embargo. I think I have to designate you professor. We close this morning's program with the playing of the last post and the laying of wreaths. Wreaths will be laid on behalf of Barbados by Dr. Chantal Monroe Knight, on behalf of Cuba by Ambassador Janet Stable Cardenas, on behalf of Guyana, Consul General Geneva Ross Tyndall, on behalf of Venezuela, Chargé d'Affaires Marta Ortega, and on behalf of the Cuba-Barbados Friendship Association, Mr. David Denny. Thank you all for attending this solemn act of commemoration. And for all who have participated in the program, thank you very much and good day.
merchant ships, minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit, but my hand was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever have, redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Ooh, some say it's just a part of it. We've got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever have, redemption songs.